Mark Smith here from Baldwin's. Today, I have a Jubilee Police Medal from 1887. This particular one is to a police constable called F. Symonds of something called H Division. Now, London was broken down into divisions, and this particular division, H, is Whitechapel. Now, he was serving the year before the Whitechapel murders of 1888. And I'm just wondering if this policeman was one of those men that went hunting for Jack the Ripper. So tomorrow, I'm going to go to Whitechapel and I'm going to meet a lady called Lindsay Siviter, who's a crime historian, and she's going to talk me through the world of the police of that year. Maybe we can find out what PC Simmons actually did. So come with me tomorrow. So, Lindsay.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you. Thanks for coming to help me out with this, because I've got this medal to this policeman. And he was here at the time because that's what the medal's about. You know, I've already explained that to everybody. But what we want to know is that on the streets of Whitechapel, he was here in 1888, the Whitechapel murderer.
Yeah.
And you're going to take me around some of the sites. So
Yep.
What were these murders?
The Whitechapel murders actually is a series of unsolved murders of women from April 1888 to February 1891. Within that sort of time frame, there were 11 murders unsolved. 5 of them, but by most historians claim that 5 of the victims were by the perpetrator known as Jack the Ripper.
Why was he called Jack the Ripper?
Well, actually, the murderer himself may not have been called that, which many people don't think he was, but the actual name Jack the Ripper comes from a letter which was sent to the Central News Agency, just at the end of September 1888, in the middle of this sort of murder spree. And so these days, most people think that letter was actually written by an enterprising journalist, but it gave the moniker, it gave the famous name,
Yeah, everybody
Jack
knows
the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper. So the ones that you talk about, 11, but you say there's the 5.
Yeah.
So who were they?
So before the 5 main ladies, there were a couple of other attempted murders and attacks as well. Emma Elizabeth Smith was attacked at the end of this alleyway on the 3rd of April 1888. Martha Tabram was attacked actually on this alleyway in George Yard Buildings on the 7th of August. Then we moved to the end of August. Polly Nichols was killed in Bucks Row on the 31st of August. A week later, Annie Chapman is killed at 29 Hanbury Street. Then we have what is known as the double event, and that is Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes are both killed on evening of the 29th going to the 30th of September. There were no murders in October, interestingly, and then Jack comes back with a vengeance to kill Mary Jane Kelly on the 9th of November in her own little room in Miller's Court in Dorset Street.
And we're going to walk round now and see the world that this policeman would have lived in and worked in and been a part of that investigation during that year of 1888.
Yeah, the policeman who that medal belonged to, this was part of his universe back then, so he would have seen these streets, he would have seen some of the buildings we're going to see today.
I can't wait. Let's go.
Okay.
So who was PC F. Simmons?
So PC F. Simmons was actually PC Francis Symonds, born on the 14th of September 1849 in a little village called Cottesmore in Rutland in the East Midlands. He's from an agriculture and farming background. His parents were cottagers. They had a bit of land with some animals and stuff like that. And then when he's 21, he moves to London. And age 22, just after his 22nd birthday, he joins the Met Police, the Metropolitan Police, in L Division, which is actually Lambeth. 5 years later, in 1876, he transfers to H Division, and he's living still in the West End in Notting Hill. 3 years after that, in 1879, he marries Elizabeth, and they have their first baby, and it was expected that all Metropolitan Police officers had to live within walking distance where their station was based if they had a family. So that forced him to move from Notting Hill to Turner Street, not far from here. And then a couple of years later, they have another child, a daughter this time, and they need more room. So that's why they move to this block.
So where are we now?
So we're standing in the Peabody estate, the Whitechapel Peabody estate, and there were 11 blocks like this all around us when PC Simmons would have known and lived here. A couple of blocks were destroyed after World War II. We have a garden now in the centre, but they all have alphabetical letters all on them, and he was in E block in flat 11, and they were built around 1880. He would have been one of the first people with his family to move in, which is quite interesting. There were basically 1,000 people living in about 300 flats at this point.
It's quite crowded though.
Very, and in fact, it was all shared toilets. There were shared sculleries or kitchens. It wasn't self-supplied. It was all you were sharing on different levels, and there was a laundry on each level as well. So yeah, life was pretty hectic here. And because the block in the middle's gone, it would have seemed quite claustrophobic in this area. Yeah.
So you said just now that if you had a family, you had to live near the police station. So where was Francis's police station?
So Francis's station was literally a couple of minutes around the corner on Lehman Street, which was the divisional headquarters for H Division.
So should we go there?
Well, sadly, we can't go and see the original station because that's been demolished, but I could take you to the street where it used to be.
Okay, let's go. This way?
Yeah, straight ahead.
Okay. So there's not many places really left, I suppose, from the time of the Whitechapel murders, but I mean, that pub must have been there at that sort of time, wouldn't it?
It was indeed. That's the Brown Bear, featured in the series Ripper Street. And actually, the policemen in this area, because we're on Lehman Street now, would have frequented that quite a lot. When they were on duty, they weren't not allowed to drink, okay, strictly no alcohol. And you would have your sort of armband to show that you were on duty.
Blue and white.
Exactly, the blue and white stripe, that showed you were on duty. When you were off duty, I guess you could drink, but you were still not allowed really to be drunk and disorderly because you'd be putting the police force's name in disrepute.
So this would have been the hotbed, the place where all the policemen would have been talking about the Whitechapel murders.
Well, actually probably not, because the police were under strict instructions not to actually divulge any information or gossip. You could actually get reprimanded for that and demoted as well. So if they were off duty, a little bit different, but you'd hope they wouldn't do that anyway.
So where are we going to go next?
So we're going to go a little bit further down because we're on Lehman Street, so I'll take you to the place where the station used to be.
Okay, come on, let's go. So here we are in Lehman Street. So this was the headquarters of H Division?
That's
so where was
right.
the police station?
So the police station would have been just straight down there on the left-hand side, roughly where the new modern building is with the flags on the top, just down there. And bearing in mind, if you think about it, there was like 76,000 people living in Whitechapel. To look after all those 76,000, you've only got about just under 600 officers.
Really?
Based in that station. There were 3 of the smaller stations, but that was the divisional HQ.
Obviously that's not it. So what happened to the original?
It got demolished a few years ago. Then there was a couple of different variations of it. But yeah, the original station got demolished and then that one was built, I think it was 1970s.
But that's where Francis would have known.
Yes, PC Simmons was based on this street, on that site over there in the station.
So where are we going next?
Well, I'm going to take you in this direction and we're going to go into the heart of Whitechapel and Spitalfields, to the heart of the Ripper territory where these murders took place.
Wow, come on then, let's go. So where are we now, as it were?
Well, we're standing in the middle of what today is Flower and Dean Walk, but in the Ripper's time this was known as the Flower and Dean Street sort of estate, the Flowery Dean really as it was known as, and this was one of the worst places for crime in the East End of London. If you looked at Charles Booth's poverty maps, they were colour coordinated depending how rich and how poor the areas were, and on the maps this was one of the blackest of the black streets. Real hotbed place for sort of criminality, vice. Police wouldn't come down here unless they were probably in groups of up to 4 for their own protection.
Really?
That's how bad it was.
So the girls that we're talking about who were murdered, would they have known this street?
Very much so. In fact, several of them lived in the same number lodging house at number 55, one of these common lodging houses, which were really horrible places as well. So the girls definitely would have known this area, especially Thrall Street, George Street, and all the streets surrounding this area, definitely.
So obviously this is hugely redeveloped. Knocked down, in the 60s or the 70s, something like that. Is there anywhere left in Whitechapel that not only Francis Symonds would have known, but also Jack the Ripper?
There's a really good street not far from here called Wilk Street, and I'm going to show you some of the oldest houses here in London.
Wow, come on then, let's go. So you said you were going to bring me to a part of Whitechapel that was there at the time. Where are we now?
So we're standing on Wilk Street right now, and the majority of these houses behind us were all here in 1888. The victims would have seen these buildings and our perpetrator too.
So gas lamps, I presume. So gloomy?
Well, electric lighting lights the streets really well today. In the Ripper's time, indeed, there was gas lighting. So that would give out a pool of light, basically. So if you weren't standing in that pool of light, it was pitch black. London was very dark, very gloomy, and these are the right circumstances for crime. Policemen, though, when they had their night shifts and they were on their night shifts, they were given one of these. which they had to sign out. This is a bullseye lantern.
Okay.
This also sort of gave out, emanated some of the light, which would have helped them on their duties. PC Simmons would have got one of these every day on duty if he was on the night duty, and then he would have to sign it out and sign it back in at the end of his shift. So would you like to see one of the murder sites?
Definitely.
Okay, so we're going to go around the corner to Hanbury Street, where on the 29th of September 1888, Annie Chapman was sadly murdered by Jack the Ripper.
Let's go.
So we're standing on Hanbury Street. Behind me was where number 29 Hanbury Street was, which was a house. Sadly, this side of the road was demolished in 1970. So if you want to get a good feel of what this street would have looked like, you have to look at the houses opposite us.
Right.
And opposite us, there's a house there with two doors, and one door led into the sort of property downstairs, and the other door led into a passageway, which led up to the rooms upstairs into the backyard. And if you imagine that set up over on this side, that's what this murder site would have looked like. So victim Annie Chapman was actually seen in front, roughly where you're standing, at about 5:30 in the morning by a witness walking past. And she's seen with a man with her hand on his chest. And the witness overhears him say two words, "Will you?" And she says yes. And the two then go through a doorway, which was kept open all night, walk through the passageway, end up in the backyard. And that's sadly where Annie is murdered.
What happened next?
By coincidence, at the exact same time Annie's being attacked, on the other side of the fence in the garden next door was Mr. Albert Kadosh, and he hears everything. Well, what he hears is a cry of no and a thud against the fence, and we believe that was actually Annie's head hitting the fence.
No.
Do you think he looked over the fence to see what was going on? No chance, doesn't want to get involved, so he goes back inside the house next door, and Annie's body lies there until 10 to 6 in the morning. At that point, somebody from the upper floors comes down and discovers the body. The mutilations were horrific, her murder's horrific. Do you want to really hear it?
Yeah.
So her throat was cut from left to right back to the spinal column. She was ripped from vagina to breastbone. The intestines were placed over the shoulder, and her uterus and bladder were removed.
So what you just described is a horrific murder. Was that going to be the worst?
Sadly not, because Jack comes back with a vengeance to kill Catherine Eddowes. A few weeks later, her mutilations were horrific, especially on her face with the injuries there. And actually, Jack's worse with this escalation of violence happening. The worst victim is actually the last, Mary Jane Kelly, who's killed in November. She's actually different because she's younger than all the other ladies. She's also killed indoors, which means the murderer can spend all night dissecting her body, which is essentially what he does.
These are genuinely horrific, aren't they? And the policeman who went looking for these things must have seen some of the most awful things.
Exactly. Imagine the policeman who had to go one of the first on scene to see the site inside Miller's Court where Mary Jane was found.
Yeah.
They would have been traumatised for the rest of their lives, possibly, through seeing that type of injury.
This is a dreadful time, isn't it? Yeah. So, why have you brought me here?
I wanted to show you this amazing building. So today, this is the mosque for the local area, but it was actually built in the 1740s as a French Huguenot chapel. Then they recycled it and it became a Methodist chapel. Then they recycled it again and it became the Jewish synagogue. So actually the three main languages spoken on the streets of Whitechapel during these murders was actually Yiddish, Russian and Polish.
Really? I mean, you don't think of that, do you? I mean, it's a part of London, so you would, but honestly,
so
that's
English
what it was.
wasn't actually the main language.
That's incredible. So now we know all about Francis, where he lived, what it was like to be a policeman in 1888, and something about those poor women that were the victims of the man known throughout the world as Jack the Ripper. This particular medal to PC Francis Symonds is for sale at the next Baldwin's Medal auction. So perhaps you could own a piece of the Whitechapel murder history. If you want to know more about this medal and indeed all of the medals in our September sale, go to baldwins.co.